Happy Thursday, friends. Good evening. This is the Mystery Wine Blind Tasting with myself, Neal, Wavra, your host, here at Field, Maine on this blustery, cold, freezing cold winter night. At least we're warm inside, and with this very interesting wine. It's got a fruit profile in the nose that is quite distinctive, but not necessarily easily identifiable. So we might have on our hands another wine that is a little bit tricky, is a little bit further afield. We'll see. I'm not getting ahead of myself, but let's start with what we should. Who's here? If you're joining, please chime in and let me know so we can say hello and begin to know whose palates we have at our disposal this evening to taste this lovely number. It's an alluring nose, though. I'm getting ahead of myself. The appearance is beautiful, too, and we'll get to that in just a second. Wow, yeah. Oh, fantastic, Sarah. So wonderful to see you, too. Sarah was in town picking up her installment of wines for the next couple of mystery wines, as well as doing an amazing tour of 5 wineries in a day. Extraordinary. You guys are the pros for sure. Dean is here with us this evening. Kathleen and Matt, good evening. Curtis, Renee, Bill, and Debbie. Oh, this is tremendous. Everybody's here tonight. That's great. Welcome, welcome. Does everybody else picking up this did they get ahead like I did? The nose just jumped right out. It's 7:02 right now. At 6:58, I poured this portion, and it was immediately expressive on the nose. And I'm not trying to get ahead, but it was obvious, which is pretty cool. So in context of that, before we get into the actual process, that's what an expressive wine smells like, right? So when we're talking about something that's quite expressive or more muted, this is pretty expressive. I just opened it. It just popped. Glad to hear you recovered as well, Julie. And it's changing fast. So we'll get to the nose, but let's do the appearance, of course. Yeah, okay, Julie, fair point that this is smoothing out a little bit after it's being opened. There's a more mineral rocky note as opposed to just fruit after a few minutes. So it was quite expressive. I mean, we should catalog it, I guess, but there was blueberry and there was cranberry, pomegranate, and they were sort of like fruit leather, sweet but dried. Anyway, we'll come back to that in the nose part. What do you see? It's red. And as you're looking at it, what elements do you pick up? What color? What does the viscosity look like? Do you have tears and legs forming? Do they hold firm and in striations that are consistent? I think they are doing just that. I mean, can you see that on the background of my shirt perhaps? But we've got tears forming. They're moving relatively slow. And they hold. So there's a little bit of viscosity here, perhaps a little bit warmer. Cranberry explosion, that's a great way to put it. And a medium ruby color to go with that cranberry quality. There's a redness to this. There's also like a garnet kind of quality too. There's a depth. This isn't like opaque, but there's a depth of character and color that this is a little bit almost brownish. But I don't think necessarily because of age. It just has sort of a dusty reddish color coming from it. So nice long legs. Yeah, you're not referring to my legs, are you, Dean? These guys right here? No, not nice and long. They are average at best. The wine does have nice long legs, yes. Dory and Larry, good evening. Welcome. Glad to have you here. And Claire, hello. Wonderful to have you joining us too. Sarah, I am also picking up on a slight meniscus. Meniscus, the watery rim that's running around the outside here, which would be another indication of some potential higher alcohol. So higher alcohol, meaning a riper site, a warmer vintage, a warm place in the world. We don't know quite yet, but those are indications that it's probably not a cool site, a cool vintage, a cool climate varietal perhaps. And so bricky. That's a good word. A tad bricky. I like that. Yes, there's a quality about this that's brickish that kind of brown red that exists in the glass here. What do we know about that? Well, oftentimes as this game works, right, as the deductive process works, we often know what it's not then. Like we don't necessarily, because it has a brickish red color, know exactly what it is, but it's not purple, right? And so it's probably not a Petit Verdot or a Tannat or something with very deep, dark pigmentation. So it's not in the running by the appearance. Claire and Monica too. Good evening. And this is yummy. You've jumped ahead to the tasting portion. I'm not there yet. I'm going to be there in just a moment. Color consistent with the clear rim? Consistent until the clear rim. Yes, thank you. It is consistent. So if there was a variation as you came to the rim and that rim color was sort of brownish, we might think that this had some age, right? Or it had faded out in color. It might be an indication of age. This goes from the center here to the edge in pretty much a consistent continuum of the same color. And then you get to the edge where the rim is, and there's like a watery rim. There's a clear rim. That's what we're calling watery rim. And that is an indication potentially of higher alcohol. First timers, no big deal at all. You can taste by all means. We generally work as first timers, Claire, just to give you an understanding, about appearance first. And we can talk for a while about appearance. We haven't even tasted the wine, and we know a great deal about the wine just because of its appearance. And you can absolutely have a sip and a drink to quench that thirst as we're talking about the appearance. Because from the appearance, we're going to start to build a structure, a profile, a scaffolding of what we think this wine might be in order to then benchmark it against what we taste and what we smell. Smell first, then taste. Each progressive part helps us to build out, flesh out that structure and create the profile of what this wine might be. And as I just said, quite a bit of it is about the deductive process, about what we can take away or what we can rule out. For example, the simplest of deductions, it's not sparkling, it's not white. And so it's not in those categories. We've just cut out half the world of wine. And so by the time we get to the taste, we can have narrowed this pretty much down to a subset of the world of wine that we have a greater chance of getting it right from a guest standpoint or an educated evaluation of what the wine might be. So let's smell it. Tons of fruit early on that have evolved if you've had it open for a period of time. What are you smelling when you're looking at when you're smelling this wine? Fruit, earth, wood, a few things. We're looking for fruit. What kind of fruit? What's the state of the fruit? Earth, minerals, cedar, wood, some kind of element that comes from the earth. And then wood, not necessarily do you smell wood, but do you smell spices and the indication of wood? Cedar can come up in the way of a little bit of oak aging. You can also get vanillin notes. You can get charred notes. You can get mocha notes. Those are things that come from the wine being aged in wood or oak. Wow, yeah, tart red fruit, red raspberry, cranberry. Yes, I agree with that. Vanilla and tobacco for sure. There's a spiciness here. There's a black tea or a steeped oolong tea, maybe even a fermented tea that's been steeped and is sort of now drying on the countertop. If you think about a tea bag after you've used it, or if you have loose leaf tea, you got lazy, you left the teapot there, and it is waiting for you to do dishes, which you're not going to do till tomorrow. That kind of tea that's been wet and dried, berries and spices and a punch of alcohol. I'm getting that too. On that deep inhale, it kind of runs back to the olfactory and you feel a little bit of that there. Larry, some spice. And when you're saying spicy, Larry, are you picking up on spice like a pyrazine spice, like a jalapeno spicy? Or are you picking up a chili spicy? Or more about like cloves, cinnamon, mace, cardamom, those sort of warm baking spices? Those are more an indication of oak. Tea, dried figs, strawberry jam. Oh, fantastic, right? So totally expressive nose with lots of elements. And those elements, are they indicative of one varietal? Are they indicative of a blend? Don't quite know necessarily. Minerality, wet slate, fantastic. Baking spices, anise. Yeah, baking spice, Larry, 100% with you there. and like star anise too, where you get that Chinese 5-spice quality too. So some wood, or perhaps the varietal being a spicier varietal, but all indications point to at least some potential wood, right? And so an oxidative quality in wood, as you're aging wine in the wood, it might get a little bit of a browning or tawnying effect. Maybe that's where some of this brickish color comes from. Cardamom, white pepper. So from the fruit side, lots of berries. And then from the earth side, a little bit of that minerality perhaps. And then and the tea quality coming there. And then talking about the wood side, all manner of these cloves, allspice, Chinese 5-spice, cardamom, white pepper. There's a woodness. So we're in all camps, fruit, earth, and wood expressed. Let's taste this wine. And as you taste it, we know it's yummy already. Thank you, Claire. The deliciousness of it aside, or in addition to, what are you picking up again in fruit, earth, and wood? Are you picking up the same elements on fruit, earth, and wood? And then also focus on maybe your second sip on the actual profile of the wine in terms of its body. Is it a lighter, medium, or robust wine? Does it have a sort of skim milk profile, a 2% profile, a whole milk profile? How does it fill your mouth? Where's the alcohol at? Is it hot and burning, or is it well integrated and light? Where's the acidity at? Is it really forward, long, and persistent, high acidity? And how about the tannin? Is the tannin aggressive and strong and gripping and coating your gums with sort of cotton balls? Or is it light and really not there? All these things will come back to reflect on what we know about the wine already, which is a bunch of fruit, a bunch of woody notes, some mineral notes, the quality of a little bit richer on the profile of the visual here. We've got thicker tiers, so maybe a warmer climate element. So we're anticipating a little bit of more alcohol, which we also smelled. So let's taste it. Alice, agree. Very smooth. Monica, 1%. I like that you're parsing it, right? So it's between skim and 2%, 1%. So it has some lightness, a little bit of body too, medium body, Larry, some tannins, and they're more upfront. Like the body weight of this wine appears to come up in the first half of the taste, as opposed to the lingering latter half. It tapers off. Okay. Yes. Dean's note, medium plus acidity, spices hit. Spices hit, and then the fruit comes on after that and builds. But the back end is a little short relative to all that is expressive up front on both the nose and on the palate. So give it a minute too to swirl and come to life, but the black tea notes are there. So what are you picking up? The fruit's there, the tea notes, the acidity is fresh, the tannins are medium minus, maybe low to medium tannin. And again, they're kind of more upfront. It tastes like a wine that is maybe more aged or advanced. It certainly doesn't appear that way in color. Some of that character and that finish might be kind of dissipating. It's a varietal that doesn't immediately, or maybe a blend that doesn't immediately jump out as being identifiable. But there are characteristics here. So what potential varietals or potential place? It's kind of the general starting point, right? Do you have a sense of place? Do you have a sense of varietal? And then which one gets you to the other? So if you had a sense of a varietal, I'm going to pick on, say, Pinot Noir, and you said this really tastes like and reminds me of Pinot Noir, then you would think about where Pinot Noir is grown. If you smell this and go, you know what, I just don't think this is, say, California, but it reminds me of Germany, well, then in Germany, you could start to think about what varietals might grow in Germany. And so And you can continue to use the deductive process, as Dean is indicating right here. None of the vegetal elements, so not Cabernet Sauvignon. So you can weed that out. We talked about it not really being Blaufränkisch or Tannat or Petit Verdot, something with that purpley color to it. And what it might be, you don't necessarily know that yet, but you're clearing out what it is not. And so that leaves something like Carignan, which Julie's throwing out there. So a Rhone varietal that has a little bit of sinewyiness. It has some of these herbal kind of tea notes. It has the red fruit characteristic. You could put Senso in there. So other varietals could be a Rhone blend, as Alice is noting, and Larry is also adding. So yeah, absolutely a Rhone varietal. Feels French. That's an important understanding, right? Like if it feels a certain way, this isn't necessarily just a pie in the sky woo-woo kind of like, oh, I think it feels like French. It's more like your palate is linking with a sensation memory that is the feeling, the sensation that it might be, right? And we've had that work for us time and time out, where it's like, this is not French, it's Spanish. And I'm not sure why or where, but it's Spanish. And so going with that for a thought is worthwhile and very important. So Julie throwing out French, agreeing that, and then adding Central Coast, those are vastly different places, right? But growing the same varietals. And so you can start to think about the place and what the place might bring. And so Carignan, Vaqueras, absolutely kind of interesting village production of mostly Grenache with Carignan and elements from the Vaqueras. If that's what you're thinking about, Sarah. Let's take that, for example, for a moment. The French versus sort of Central California. And Central California, by and large, associated with more fruit components, little less earth, maybe some wood. Great producers that are making some interesting wines that are compelling. Would we get the tart red fruit, or would it be a little bit more ripe red fruit? Could be both, depending on where it's grown. Like if you're in the Central Coast, if you're in Santa Barbara Hills or something of that sort, if you're in Santa Rita and making something along those lines and they're on the high hillside, you're going to get a lot of warmth, a little bit more concentration. You're going to get the alcohol. So that's a valid guess here for sure. You can still get that ripeness in the Rhone too. It's quite warm there as well, but you get a little bit more of these other extra notes typically. A Lodi Carignan, very cool. So going more Central Valley in the way of the Carignan, and you get old vine Carignan coming from Lodi, which would be interesting and pretty cool, really neat wines, but also fruitier potentially, right? And so could be winemaking in the Central Valley or Central Coast of California that helps to get a little bit less of this, where you still get the ripeness from the fruit, but maybe a little bit more restraint on the fruit. Yeah, Napa's too big, I think, and too rich from the fruit side, more primary and even jammy. And so, So we've narrowed the world down into two places just in this moment from tasting it, right? So from it's not sparkling, it's not white, it's red, it is not Petit Verdot, maybe not Blaufränkisch, it's not Cabernet. We're just pushing away, getting to taste like Rhone, taste like Southern France or Central Coast California, perhaps. Where else should we consider from the Rhone context? Australia has Rhone varietals and have had them planted for a long time, for example, and can be ruled out pretty quickly too. I mean, just consider that. And should there be other varietals we think about that would fit this bill too, right? We talked about Pinot Noir for a second. I don't think this is Pinot Noir. I wouldn't have this kind of profile. So that's kind of out. And then are there other varietals? We've had Blaufränkisch before. We've had Zweigelt before. We've had Saint Laurent from Austria. We've had Italian varietals here. Are we missing out on Italian because we thought it felt French? And it can still be French, but considering a Sangiovese, considering a Dolcetto or a Barbera, a Nebbiolo, a Corvina, do we have any elements here that we should consider in those realms? A nap in a glass, like sleepy. lounging. It's a lounging wine. It's kind of easy drinking. Nice. Like a Sunday afternoon, easy like Sunday morning rather. And absolutely have a quality about a blend here potentially with all those different aromatics. Might not be far off from being a blend. When you have carrying on as a grape too, it's difficult to find it as a single varietal, but it can be. And so it might be blended. Definitely not Italy. Defiantly not. Definitely not. Defiantly not. No. Julie's got that, and Larry agrees. Yeah, I mean, I agree too. There's usually a quality about the acidity on Italian wines which just doesn't necessarily display. There's oftentimes a little bit more of a wild quality too. That's a little bit less refined, I think in a beautiful way in Italian wine. Red table wine from Delaware. That would be a first and would be awesome. It's not on my reference point, so I'm not comfortable calling it. But if you have had red table wine from Delaware, Larry, then please, by all means, call that. And that earthiness, that's a great way to put it too, Julia. I mean, there's not quite that. There is sort of that mineral, concrete, whetstone quality about this that is coming out for sure. I'm so pleased to be joined by so many experts in Delaware wine, where Dean can differentiate and parse out Southern Delaware vis-a-vis the rest of it in the world of wine. I know nothing about Delaware wine. I'm going on record. Sangiovese, right? Yeah, I think there's a quality of earth that we were missing in this wine, but there is the redness, the character of some of the red berry elements. Okay. So back to kind of the Rhone. I don't think it's necessarily German. I don't think there's necessarily Italian there, right? So I don't think this also from the Rhone varietal context is Australia. I think we'd get more ripeness. And as a result, we're back kind of in the Rhone. There's a little astringency, sunny, like a sunny ripe alcohol, but then it's counteracted by this astringency, this almost bitter quality on the back end. And oftentimes that's a reflection of some kind of whole cluster element where they're pressing the whole cluster of grapes as opposed to separating the grapes from the stems. And as a result, you're getting a little bit of that stem quality that can oftentimes be a little bit savory, a little bit bitter. I don't think that's in a bad way. Just it makes this wine interesting on the back end. And the grapes you'd find typically done that way would include Syrah, would include something like Gamay or Pinot Noir, lighter skin varietals necessarily that you don't find a whole lot of whole cluster, say Cabernet, for example. So we're in that same vein. So that might lead, if it's say Syrah with whole cluster, going in with some carrying on, back to the idea of a Rhone blend. And so the tea, wow, it's still there for sure. So at 24 minutes, right, we're in the 4-minute zone of 20 to 24 minutes. Oftentimes it's at 22 minutes where the wine changes substantially. Wow. I love it. We've got Larry been in southern France. Claire and Monica agreeing with Larry. We've got South Africa, could absolutely have some of these elements there for sure too. Dean adding that to the category. And then Julie's note of Rhone, G with a wee bit of S, Grenache with a little bit of Syrah. But Dean's joining back into the Rhone Club. So I like the Rhone Club a lot because I like you guys. And I like the ideas that are put forth here. Here's my one contention, I guess, or what I'm wrestling with, is what about the back end? That short finished back end. And that short finished back end is this outside of the Rhone just a little bit, like a more flat lying or a little less concentrated expression. Still warm, still expressive, nice wine, but not necessarily the pedigree to kind of get that full back end. And it's coming on a little bit more herbal. Larry, Grenache knows, Julie's agreeing. You guys are simpatico in where you're tasting. Tannins are building a little bit for me. There's an herbal quality about this. Northern Spain, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. There's something about the finish here that is tripping me up, not letting me latch as comfortable. There's sort of maybe it is really just southeastern France, excuse me. And like there's that garrigue idea that there's all these wild herbs that are kind of growing. So maybe we're in a satellite of the Rhone, one of the villages of the Rhone that make up the Côte de Rhône village, but not necessarily a village like Vaqueras or Gigondas that has more pedigree and more concentration. Carignan has this a little bit more, not so much pyrazine like a Cab Franc would, but more of that kind of sinewy, long and kind of elastic tannin that is there, doesn't quite dissipate, isn't coating or expansive, but like stringy. And this has a little bit of that. Bobbin, I agree with you there. Dean, thank you for sharing Bobbin's note too, that it has dissipated a little bit in the way of aroma. It's not quite as expressive on the fruit side for sure. I'm picking up more of that earth, that herbal, the tea, and I'm getting that more now on the palate. So a lot of that primary kind of fruit expression has blown off a little bit. One thing's for sure, this wine evokes a great deal of thought and concentration. I mean, it's a lot more acidity right now. I needed to swallow before talking. That acidity is making me salivate too. It's prompting a lot of conversation, and that's fantastic. It's a wine that has an element about it that way alone that makes it compelling. Iron minerality. So where do we get iron-rich soil? Yeah, and we get sinewy tannin, we get red fruit, we get high-ish alcohol, we get medium body, light to medium body in the middle there. Could that be Rhone? Or Rhone varietal just outside of the Rhone. So maybe like Minervois or the Languedoc, somewhere down in southern France. Awesome. Yeah. Everybody comfortable in France relative to, say, the Central Coast? Because that was floated before. And not everybody has to be on the same page. If you have a different page you want to read from, by all means, share that page. This is a really great blind wine because it has some elements that are clear, but not some others that are just not. And that's just because I don't know the reference point as well. I'm getting a little bit more earth, manure, poopy element that's coming back to make me really feel a lot more confident in Europe than it would in, say, California. Dave, you're going Mid-Coast Carignan. Cool. Some kind of Rhone, Dean, and Bobbin. There's a whole bunch more coming out now. I got a whiff of an actual pyrazine, which from a pyrazine standpoint, like you're talking about Cabernet Franc, you're talking about Cabernet Sauvignons. You're not talking about Syrah. If you get a pyrazine, you're not hitting on Syrah. Love that description, Claire. Thank you. Central France, down on Main Street next to Grandma's. There you go. It's wonderful how wine can evoke such an idea, right? It's grape juice fermented, and yet it can take you a place like that. And with an image like that, that's fantastic. All right, planting flags. Down the street, Main Street, that is, next to Grandma's house, there's a flag there. Rhone blend. Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think I'm going to go more like Southern France, Languedoc sort of appellation, but a blend, but Carignan and Sanso, Claret, a little bit of Grenache, a little bit of Syrah perhaps. So a less traditional Rhone blend, but Rhone varietals in the southern part of France. And I'm going to say 2020. I think there's a little bit of age here. I don't think there's a tremendous amount, but a little bit. And so, oh wow, it smells like vermouth right now. All that red fruit with that garrigue kind of spice and herb. Like I said, reference points, but nothing like concrete that I can recall. Wow. That's why it makes me feel like I haven't done this in forever. All right, Southern France, 2020, blend, but Carignan, Sanso, kind of elements here with maybe a little bit of Syrah, a little bit of Grenache. That's where I'm planting the flag. Okay, we've got others saying the same idea. Rhone, Southern France, Grenache, somewhere red, somewhere out, or some from somewhere else, but red. Look at that. Côte de Rhone, 2020. Fantastic, guys. Awesome. Emmy-Arnoux, what do we know? 65 Grenache, 35 Syrah. So some elements correct, some elements not. It's got 14% alcohol, so it's got a bit of richness to it. They've been growing since 1717, 50-year-old vines. It's a neat wine. Very cool. I love how we got to the Rhone, guys, and then how I walked right out of it. Oh, delightful. No, this is fantastic. But Grenache, as a couple of you noted, that right out of the gate, Sarah and Julie and Larry, right, jumped out at the idea of the Grenache on the nose, and then things shifted a little bit, which is okay. We got a little bit of a profile that's lighter than expected, maybe, on the back end for Grenache and Syrah alone, but this is maybe where the place is, right? So Côte de Rhone, it's not necessarily a village or a pedigreed space, but it has some older vines, which are giving some really unique layered flavors. That's really cool. I think most of you get full credit for going Rhone blend. That is awesome. And what was the comment earlier? Mostly G with a little bit of S, I think, right? That was Dean, or wasn't it? Or no, maybe that was, I'm going back here looking at the notes. Julie noted G with a wee bit of S. So there you go. Yeah. 2/3 G, 1/3 S. Well done. Oh, Claire, great question. What's Carignan? Carignan's one of many, or 14, 17, depending on who you're talking to, varieties that are grown in the Rhone. It's a type of varietal, like Syrah, like Grenache, but different. And it's oftentimes a part of a blend, very rarely on its own, although there are some really cool and very compelling old vine Carignans coming from the Central Valley and Central Coast of California. And there are some old vine Carignans that are found in the southern part of France that are awesome. Some also awesome Carignans coming from, which are called Carignana in Spanish, from Priorat and from Spain. And so awesome varietal that can give you a good deal of intrigue and a lot of the characteristics we were describing. So we were on that front, but not necessarily by way of what the label tells us in this bottle. But I wouldn't be surprised if they had some in there. Why not? They splash that in there and don't talk about it. They just have Grenache and Syrah planted in a Rhone vineyard? Nah. They've got to have some Carignan, some Senso, some other things. And they just put it in there and just put 65-35 on the label or the back label, and it's always that, even though it changes. I'm making it up, but I don't think I'm far off. So, it's getting cooler, isn't it? How did I guess the year, Alice? Part of that was luck, and part of that was I'm thinking about 2 to 5 years being sort of new, and we didn't see a whole lot of variation from this point in the glass to this point. So there wasn't a great deal of age that was here by way of colored variation. When the wine ages, when a red wine in particular ages, color falls out in the form of sediment. And as that sediment falls, you lose a little bit of the pigmentation of the actual wine. And that can vary then, being kind of browned all the way through being a wine that's quite old, or as it's starting to age, it'll lose a little color around the rim. We didn't see a lot of that, but we got a softness on the back end of it that sort of suggested this wine is meant to be consumed earlier. It's a fresh wine that is showing a little bit fatigued on the back end. So I think I'm going to add a couple of years to the age classification. Wow, now it's got like candied fruit. I hope that answered your question, Alice. Larry's saying it's not Carignan because it was definitely not. But there's elements there that are very Rhone-like and so associate with Carignan. Claire, tips on how to distinguish varietals. This is something about getting to know the varietals. Yeah, it is drinking more, it's tasting more, and just paying attention to when you're drinking what you're drinking. Start to build your own profile. Pinot Noir has this flavor profile. Cabernet has this flavor profile. And those profiles are what you're using as generalizations for what you're using to reference back and forth what something might be, but also what it isn't. And so that's how you start to understand a little bit more about how to blind taste. And it improves your appreciation for wine too, as you're starting to pick out little elements, not being critical necessarily, but just being a cataloger of, wow, I tasted black tea in this, oolong tea, I tasted red fruit. That takes me to the Rhone. Okay, cool. I'm going to remember the Rhone with those flavor profiles. It may not be, again, that is, when you taste those profiles, it could be something else that's related, but then that something else has a relation to the Rhone too. And that's the neat part. It definitely needed to open, Larry. I couldn't agree more. Like it is opening and continuing to evolve. Usually at 20 minutes, we kind of kick into a different profile, but this one at 30 minutes, 35 minutes is changing more. And that back end experience that was a little bit faded up front is expanding. This is a wine that was maybe more like, when you buy a pillow and it comes to you packed and it's been vacuum sealed and so it's depressed. It's still a pillow, but it's not comfortable or serving its real function and purpose yet. And it needs to open up. This wine has to open up and aerate a little bit in order to fill itself. And as it's filled up, I've gotten more volume on the back end. It's still a little short, but it's not as short as it was right out of the gate. Yep, that's great. And to the point of drinking more wine, which everyone agrees is a worthwhile pursuit. Claire has said it, mission accepted. We'll continue this mission next month, as we do our next blind tasting. But if you're up for some more really compelling special wine experiences, we've got 2 scheduled in March. We're going to be very fortunate to have Ms. Perez joining us in March, on March 6th. She is part of a family and is the director of 2 wineries, one in Rioja and one in Rueda, and some really amazing wines coming out of both places. Bodegas Ontanon makes organic and very natural-oriented, old-school kind of Rioja, and then they make a wine called Ripadori, which is the name for the river, the Duero River that runs through. And these wines are really compelling whites and a little bit of interesting red on the on the Tempranillo side. And so we're going to have a host of wines as she takes us through a tasting of both of those places by way of a seminar, and then a very cool dinner featuring mostly Tempranillo, including a white Tempranillo, which is pretty much a first for most people, but tremendous tasting. Those spaces are available for that event on our website. And then on March 19th, we're going to be visited by Brooke, who is the representative of Pay Vineyards. And if you don't know Pay, this is two brothers, and one of the brothers' wife who makes the wines out at Pay, which is in the northwestern corner of Sonoma on the true Sonoma coast, making really outstanding Pinot Noir, some very cool, meaningful Chardonnay, a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc, and some Syrah. And we're going to taste 4 different single site productions of Pinot Noir for the seminar, and then enjoy sort of a blended Pinot Noir at dinner along with Sauvignon Blanc, Syrah, and a Chardonnay. It's going to be awesome. Those wines are awesome. I've worked with them now for 20 years and love those wines, in particular a wine called Scallop Shell from a really unique old vineyard that was an old seabed that has fossilized scallops in the soil. So just beautiful wines that both are available for reserving spaces now. So March promises to be an exciting month here at Field & Main relative to food and wine events. Claire, to answer your question, Julie Gray and our wine team here pick the wines for our events. Their effort is in trying to create an opportunity for us to try wines perhaps that we haven't before, and also to try wines that we have, and to create a curated selection of really unique wines. And speaking of curated selection of unique wines, to answer Julie's question, I don't have my calendar in front of me, but the Spring Wine and Wine event, I think, is at the end of April. And so that is coming up too. If you haven't been to one of those before, our buying events, one in the spring, one in the fall, are geared toward trying to create an experience for you like we get to have as wine professionals when we go to a wine tasting. We go to a buying event. There are a series of tables set up with different wines at each table, and you taste around the tables in order to evaluate wine to purchase. And that's how we end up going to special tastings at points when we're not just tasting directly here at the restaurant. We'll go to a specialized tasting, a very big one coming up at the beginning of next month at the Casella warehouse, where you're at a warehouse tasting and you taste through hundreds of potential wines. What we do is pare those down to about between 16 and 20 wines that we believe all are worthwhile. Because one of the lesser known parts about being in this position is that you taste a lot of wine that's not so great in order to find the ones that are. And so that's kind of the objective for us, to give you that experience where you get to taste through a bunch of wines before you have to buy them. You go to Total Wine, you don't always get a chance to try the wine. You come here, you'll get a chance to try 16 to 20 wines, which we've hand selected, palette selected for you. And yeah, if you get a refund from the government, you can spend that. Or if you want to just be derelict and not pay your taxes, as Larry's indicating there, and buy wine, please do that too. So April 26th, Julie, I don't know for sure. I'd have to go back and look, but we'll have that up on the site as an opportunity to book those things quite soon if we don't already. And so a lot of fun coming up. Teasing that even further, we'll have a very special event in May. May 1st will be Linden. And Linden hasn't been back for a little while. We're going to talk about their new plantings of Fiano by way of a seminar, and then taste some of their new and older vintages, of course, with a dinner. So lots of fun wine events coming up this way. And I look forward to hopefully having some of you here for those events. And if not then certainly visiting again with me on these Mystery Wine Blind Tastings. Thank you for a super compelling, wonderful event tonight. Changed again. Just sit with this for the rest of the evening. Hope you do as well. Cheers. Thank you very much. Ooh, Claire, I'm sorry, before I go, yes, to your question I just saw, food and wine pairings for this wine today. Absolutely elements of braised meats, a little bit of lamb quality things with spice. So thinking about Northern Africa in the way of maybe a lamb kebab and pomegranate seeds or pomegranate molasses on it. It can handle a little bit of tanginess and high acidity in the way of a tangy cheese like feta, perhaps. So if we're putting a little bit of a pita down and some slice of a lamb leg that's been marinated in yogurt, sumac on top of that, a little bit of pomegranate drizzle, pomegranate seeds, touch of mint, perhaps, some pine nuts toasted, something of that sort. Yeah. Ooh, cauliflower, chickpeas, halloumi. Yeah. Zucchini boat with mushrooms and ricotta. 100%. I think those go. This is versatile enough to just also drink with pizza, right? A little bit of cured meats, salami, pepperoni, something of that sort on top of a pizza with a tangy sauce, a little bit of an herbal quality. Yeah, this wine has some versatility to it for sure. Yeah, sounds great. We'll have to go find some of that. Let's see what we have downstairs. Cheers, everybody.